Hi, I'm Jonathan, and I'm going to call this video the OMA Buyer's Guide for Billionaires. Because it turns out that, well, we get a lot of people in the billionaire category who are interested in, who purchase our top level OMA gear. And the way billionaires buy things, they need a little help, at least from me, as to how to get what they want. For the rest of you, you might find out in this video a bit more about the buying habits of billionaires. You may even decide that you don't want to be a billionaire after this is through. You'll certainly find out a bit about why high-end audio, why high fidelity sound in the home is in the condition it's in now. And that has to do with a profession and people called AV integration, AV integrators. But I'm skipping ahead. Recently, I was contacted by an AV integrator out of the UK. His name is Dave Chester. Normally, I don't call shout out people, but I'm making an exception. In this case, Dave Chester is the principal at a integration company called Custom Controls out of the UK. Will put up his information for future reference on this video. And he contacted me and said, I have a client, a very good client, and he's interested in OMA speakers and equipment for a new home project that we're doing. We exchanged the usual information, and comes back to me and says, okay, the client wants me to fly over from Europe to New York City to your showroom, and I want to have a demonstration, audition all the relevant products, and we'll go from there. So Dave Chester shows up, and I proceed to give him the long-form audition, demonstration of all the relevant products that he's interested in, any which way that he wants to hear them, with vinyl, digital, etc. This is somebody who's been around the block. 4.5 hours later, he seems pretty convinced. You know, he's never experienced anything like what we make. Not the way it sounds and not the way it looks. So he then asks me the question, and this is one that's given me a lot of problems over the nearly 2 decades that I've been doing Oswald's Mill Audio, now Fleetwood Sound. And he says, okay, well, I should point out that the client is a billionaire who is renovating a duplex penthouse in Rome overlooking the Colosseum. And this client is something of an audiophile, and he already owns very expensive audiophile equipment, but he's looking for systems from us, major systems, not just one, but at least 2, maybe more. Right. So we've established how good our equipment sounds. He's understood how it's made, how it looks. And then he says, well, what's my margin? That's the question. What's my margin? And what he's asking for is not a margin, because Dave Chester was sent by the client to be the reviewer of our equipment, get back to the client as to the quality and any other concerns about the equipment. But he says, what's my margin? Because he wants to structure this as a deal where he is making a profit on reselling our equipment. And I said, well, in this kind of situation, there isn't a margin, because the client sent you, and so the client should pay for you. If you come to me with a unique client where you recommended OMA to the client, and we have an established relationship, yeah, then I have a margin for you. And I said, and the reason I'm not offering a margin to you, so-called. It's not a margin, by the way. It's a bribe. The reason I'm not offering you the margin is very simple. Because in the nearly 2 decades of doing this, I've dealt with many, many AV integrators just like you. And the conversation always goes exactly the same. And the way it goes is this. I'm a big-time AV integrator, and I have this super rich, maybe super famous client, and I have many more like these. So you're going to give me this margin, and I'm going to sell your equipment to all sorts of people, you know, in my clientele. And I used to do this. And I paid hundreds of thousands, actually millions of dollars in these so-called margins, which are actually just bribes, to these AV integrators, and I never heard from any of them ever again. Not once. A perfect track record of take the money and run. Because AV integrators don't care about sound quality or actually their clients' interests. They care about one thing: how much money they can stuff into their pockets. And so this AV integrator said, oh, okay, I'll think about this. And 2 days later, calls me up and says, yep, we're going in a different direction. And I'm like, oh, really? What direction would that be? And he says, well, we're going to go with Magico. Now, Magico is an American speaker brand, very expensive. Their top speakers are, I think, pushing about $1 million these days. And I said, that's interesting. Why Magico? He says, well, the client likes Magico, owns some Magico already. And he says, Magico will give me 35 points margin. I said, ah. And he said, without haggling. So I said, well, you mean to say that you know how our equipment sounds compared to Magico, right? Yeah. It's not even in the same class, right? No. And you know how our equipment looks and is built, right? Yeah. And it's not Magico, right? Correct. So you're telling me that you've come over here on the client's dime and you are going to tell the client a lie. You're going to tell him something that our equipment isn't as good as what you think he should buy, so that you can collect the 35% from Magico and make $200,000, probably closer to $300,000 in your pocket without the client ever knowing. So Dave Chester is not going to tell his client that he's profiting at the client's expense. This, by the way, is really the definition of corruption, which is taking trust and entrustment and selling it out for private gain, for bribes, fraudulently. That's the definition of corruption. And this whole high-end industry has been so utterly corrupt for so long. I'll get to that in a moment. Let's get back to the buyer's guide for billionaires. So here's what happens, and this has happened over and over again. A few years ago, I stopped doing it. And I've lost some major, major sales for exactly this reason. And people have said to me, you know what, Jonathan, stop it. Just play the game. Acknowledge the corruption and pay these people their bribe and take the sale. And actually, you know, if I was a good businessman, that's exactly what I would do. But I'm not a good businessman, and I'm not playing that game. If I want to play a game, I'll get on the squash court, I'll play bocce, I'll grab a deck of cards. What I do is not a game. And I don't pay bribes to your minions who get sent over here to falsely evaluate or review. AV integrators don't know shit about sound. They just don't. I will say, actually, that there's 2 exceptions to this. In the 20 years I've been doing this, right now, there are 2 AV integrators who have come to me very recently and who do know about sound and they actually respect what we do, and they're interested in it. They want to present it to certain clients who are open-minded, and those are different beasts. Those are different creatures. The AV integrator that I'm talking about, you know who you are. You know, the AV integrators for Lewis Hamilton, all the ones who threw us under the bus because we wouldn't pay the VIG. We wouldn't pay the bribe, and for nothing. Because if you think that the AV integrator is actually doing some work, they're not. Not in terms of our equipment. This stuff doesn't get connected to the 10 kilometers of Cat 5 and Cat 6 cable that AV integrators used to run everywhere through the walls and ceilings to some dreadful rack of Crestron or Sonos equipment. You don't buy this to hook it up to junk. This is freestanding. It doesn't get connected to the rest of the house. You can connect the rest of the house to it. It doesn't get connected that way. So the AV integrator isn't doing anything. They're just trusted by the billionaires. Why? Well, it seems that extremely wealthy people, they can't be bothered to go shopping for themselves. It's kind of funny, actually. You know, for the rest of us, I think when we think about money, we think about two things. We think about security, and we think about pleasure and gratification. So leaving security aside, the pleasure part, when you have some money that's disposable, you think about, like, what can I do with it? What can I buy with it? And then there's this process, it's called shopping. And that's something that, you're supposed to really enjoy doing. Deciding what you might want, looking for it, finding it, buying it, taking it home, owning it. Unfortunately, billionaires, I kind of feel sorry for you, because you're not getting all the fun out of all this money that you've accumulated, which you deserve that fun. I'm sure you worked very hard to accumulate that much money. So outsourcing the process, which should be one of the great pleasures, like wine tasting. Do you decide how to stock your wine cellar by looking in a wine magazine and seeing what got the highest reviews and buying cases of that and thinking, well, I don't know anything about wine. That must be good. Or do you go out and taste the wine someplace, hopefully with the people who made it? When you come here for an audition, you're dealing with the winemaker, because I'm ultimately the one who decided what we made and how it got made and how it should sound and how it should look. Got a great design team with people like David D'Imperio that make the stuff look amazing. The world's best people designing the engineering part of it. But ultimately, I'm that person, and you get to interact with me directly. And I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass. I'm not going to try and sell you something because I make a higher margin on it, because it doesn't work that way. So when you deal with audio dealers, for example, you're dealing with these margins that are crazy. Wilson, Magico, these brands have a 65% minimum margin. That means when you spend $100,000 on a speaker, for example, $65,000 goes to the dealer and $35,000 to the manufacturer. Now, why is this important? You might go, well, that's just how business is. Well, because the brands actually fight with each other, giving ever greater margins in the hopes that the dealers will go with that brand, pushing it so that they'll get more sales. It's been a race to the bottom, which is why high-end audio has such crazy, stupid prices attached to it these days. Because with these margins that have been necessary to sell product that can't really be sold much on its own merits, this is what you've got. Then the AV integrators have told the rich people that the speakers they stick in their ceiling are just as good as this, and they know. And by the way, let me build you a home theater. and let me give you every other possible useless form of technology which will be outmoded soon. AV integrators actually have a big problem because what they've been doing is now being outmoded by wireless devices and by AI. So you won't even need them anymore. But they've had a stranglehold on wealthy people's approach to technology in the home, and they've been telling wealthy people for decades that high-fidelity sound equipment is an antique and fossil, and what you need is whatever they've got for sale today and whatever they make the highest margin on. Because I can tell you from my experience with virtually all of the AV integrators I've ever dealt with, the only thing they cared about was how much money they stuffed into their own pockets. So what we have here is a pretty messy situation where high-end audio has been thrown under the bus by AV integrators, by the corrupt way in which the industry has functioned with crazy-ass margins, with equipment that, doesn't sound very good to begin with, gets pushed to hell by magazines that have their own agenda, and then, sold by dealers who are pushing whatever makes them the most money. AV integrators, whose whole business interest is in making the most money, doing the least, and who know nothing about sound quality, and who should never be entrusted with decisions regarding how you have sound in your home. This is not a great situation. There's one final observation that I thought about in doing this, and that is, how it used to be. No matter how much money you had, the only way to listen to music at home before digital was to have what was called a stereo, right? Two big speakers. This is before big screen TVs and home theaters and digital anything. So you had two big speakers and you had a turntable. And you had the amplifiers and other things necessary to amplify this, and you had your records. And it was sort of a thing of pride that it was typically a male thing, which, it shouldn't be just a male thing, that the man knew how to use the stereo. The man set it up himself, how to put the cartridge on and how to get all these things sounding good together. It was kind of like knowing how the grill works, even if you're not the cook at home, how to grill something in the backyard. That was your thing. And you owned it. It was yours. You put a record on, it was a ritual. You could sit back, you had friends, listen to music. It was a thing, and you were involved in it. You didn't have to call up your AV integrator. It's like, I forgot the password again. How does this work? So when you farm out the trust and the authority and the power to do things yourself, and we're all headed into a very problematic place with AI. Because as it is, we've all gotten too reliant on our devices and our phones. We just don't know how to do anything anymore. But, when it comes to sound and audio, if you want great sound at home, you need to be participating in the whole process. You need to be coming here and buying it yourself. Don't send some AV integrator who's going to try and get me to give them bribes. You need to know what this is so you can actually use it fully. You don't have to know how everything works back here. You just have to know how to use it. But then it's yours. You'll own it. You're going to take a lot more pleasure in it. And that's an attitude, I think, that we should be all thinking about, about how we're doing things and how much we want to outsource everything and to who. So, billionaires, take back the reins on this process. Call me directly. The rest of you, hopefully you understand why hi-fi is now, not an endangered species. It's almost extinct. Watch the listening videos I've done on that. But, it's all maybe just a little more complicated than you thought it was. Thanks for listening.